So after spending a half an hour with one guy in the cab and one guy under the cab, we finally got our last body bolt out of the truck. And now the cab is ready to be removed from the frame. And since somebody who painted this truck before me seam sealed the fenders to the body and then painted the truck, I cannot remove the fenders off this truck, or it will probably need to be repainted because it's going to blow the paint apart. So he did not make my job easy, but we're going to try to get the body off of this truck. It would be easier if I was able to pull the front fenders off, because then I could pick the cab up at the front of the cab and at the rear of the cab really without any issues, but I have fenders in my way, so that makes it much more difficult for me. So I'm actually going to set the cab down on some stands and get the frame out from under it, and then once I have the frame out from under it, I should be able to get my lift positioned in places where I can pick the cab up, get it up in the air, get everything out from under it, and then I can get my engine out of the frame rails and start getting my other frame put back together. Wish me luck. This could end very badly. Strike one! They're too big. They won't fit in the space I have to work with, so I have to come up with another creative solution. I'm not sure what that is yet, but I'll figure something out. I gotta build a thing. I love my wagon. So I picked up some hardware and some lumber over at the hardware store, picked up my saw and some scrap wood for my house. And now I'm going to build basically a box to drop the cab on so that I can get the frame out from under it. And then hopefully I can position my lift in a way with the frame out of the way to pick the cab up and get it up and out of the way so I can get the old frame out, the new frame back in. It's like anything, you got to figure out a way to do it. Whatever works is what works. It would be much easier if I could pull the front fenders off, but because the front fenders have been seam sealed and painted over top of that seam, I don't want to create any more damage to the paint on this as what I can help. I mean, this is a pretty major operation. I may get a couple scuffs or nicks on it, but I don't want to be blowing the paint off the fenders and cab sides. So we're going to do as best we can. I was thinking about it, and because of the extra weight on the nose, I'm actually going to throw some weights in behind the seat at the back of the cab to help offset the weight of the nose for where my support's going to be. And I think that getting my weight and balance where it needs to be, I think that'll make my My cabs sit fine for what I'm planning. So let me get after this. Let me get my support box built so that I have something to set this cab on so we can get the frame out from under it. This is either where I'm successful or I get to buy a new 53 Chevy for somebody. I think I'll be successful. We're going to stay positive. And this is where my day either goes really well or really bad.
And we edited it out. Mr. Customer, you wouldn't believe what happened. Somebody broke into the shop.
Yay! So we've made pretty good progress today. Cab's up, engine's ready to pop. Well, I gotta disconnect a couple power steering hoses and then the engine's ready to pop. I'm hoping my engine will come out without me having to pull the headers off, but I'm usually not that lucky, but we'll find out here in a minute. And I'm gonna try and set the engine down in the new frame rails because I wanna know today if I need to order different headers to fit in the S10 frame. These headers are designed for a second gen Camaro. While the second gen Camaro front suspension and frame rails are similar to an S10, I don't think they're the same. The S10 front suspension is typically more similar to the 80s style Monte Carlos and Pontiac Grand Prix and what was the Oldsmobile? Oldsmobile Cutlass. That's really the suspension design. Air compressor. So we'll see if they fit. If they do, great. If they don't, then I need to order some headers tonight for this project to keep moving it forward. The cab is in the air, that's a good thing. The bad thing is I'm not exactly sure how I'm gonna get the cab back onto the new truck frame because everything's in the way. But that's a problem for another day. Let's keep moving forward, get the engine and transmission fit into the chassis, get all my fuel lines, get all my brake lines run on the chassis so that when I drop this down, all I have to do is do some drops and hook up electrical. Once I get this engine off, I will show you the entire reason why we are doing this entire frame swap. As you can see, there's some extra stuff in here, and the frame is a lot different than what it should be. The 53 truck frame that was under this was actually a really nice frame, but the fellow who did part of the work on this truck before I was involved in it, he chose to weld in a second gen Camaro subframe, which, I mean, that happened a lot in the 70s and 80s, maybe in the 90s, but ever since the 90s we've had bolt-in TCI Mustang 2 suspensions that are affordable and they work great. They're quick, they're light, and they work great. So doing all the work involved with getting your geometry correct and getting the frame square and welding all this stuff together, cutting out all the other stuff, it's just welding in a front subframe into a good frame just isn't something that most shops would choose to do. It's much more cost effective and much faster time wise to do a bolt-in Mustang 2 front suspension or something like that. A lot of guys actually put, I think it's Lincoln Town Car front clips into these trucks, which there's actually several conversion kits for that as well. Gives you disc brakes, modern suspension, rack and pinion. I mean, it's a great way to upgrade your vehicle. But we're sticking with the Code 504 kit for this truck. I think it's a neat package, and I'm excited to get moving forward with it and get this truck back on the road where it's safe, and when you hit a bump it doesn't make turns and all sorts of weird stuff. So With that, let's pop this motor out of these rails and keep moving forward. So I'm hitting the frame right here. I'm gonna adjust it. Oh. Oh. Need more heat. Now we're talking. Oh, good. Fire extinguisher. Fire extinguisher.
You know, when you started doing that, I was actually like, where's the fire extinguisher? Oh,
right
there, okay. I actually just thought about that when before you started. I'm glad I did.
All right. Safety first. Yeah.
I'm sure that one.
I pinched off.
You pinch off the fuel line?
I pinched off the fuel line, but I didn't blow the fuel line out. So I probably should have done that. Oh well. So my cutting torch got away from me and ignited some fuel that was on the floor. Luckily, we know where our fire extinguishers are. As I was just telling Derek, in the 20 years I've been doing this, I've discharged 2 fire extinguishers and I've used a blowgun once on the 3rd fire that I've had. That's pretty good for 20 years of working on cars. So it is what it is. I got the frame clearance, just ready to pop this motor up and out of these frame rails, and then we can move on to bigger and better things. So the Code 504 kit comes with its own brand new engine mounts and engine brackets for the engine. So I just installed those. We're going to drop this engine down in between the frame rails of the new frame and see if the headers that I have from a 2nd gen Camaro will fit in the S10. I'm hoping they do. I'm trying to be optimistic. We'll see what happens. Well, that's what I thought. These headers won't work in this frame. Not too surprised. The 2nd gen Camaro is a wider in the back than this is, so no big deal. I will order a set of headers today, hopefully have them here early next week. I'll pop these headers off, set the engine down into the frame rails, And then it's time to put a transmission in here. So now I'm installing my motor mount bolts from the back, putting my nuts on the fronts, because then if this engine ever needs to come out and get put back in, servicing it after the fact, I don't have to pull off power steering pumps or fuel pumps to get the nuts off. Whereas I would probably have to pull some of those items, at least the fuel pump, to get the bolt out the front. So it's easier to pull the bolts out the back. So for future service, I try to think about what's going to be easier to service the thing down the line. So with those in, that's a win. That's a pretty good win for today. I think I might go so far as to set the tranny in here because I'm on a roll and I've got a little bit of time left, so I'm going to keep moving. Whenever you're installing your transmission, you always have to be careful to make sure your torque converter hasn't slipped out. Make sure it's back all the way. My torque converter slipped out while I was moving stuff around, and the transmission wasn't connecting to the engine the way I needed it to, and I double checked my torque converter, and sure enough it was bound, so I took it loose, put it back on the way it needs to be, put it back together, no problems. So my engine's in the saddles, the transmission's in between the rails. I'll put my cross member in there. I gotta get a different transmission mount because this one's not gonna work. But so far so good. I will probably have to modify this cross member, or at least the transmission mount bracket. But it looks like I will be able to just drill a hole and maybe trim back the bracket, and then everything will be where it needs to be. So that's pretty good. For now, I'm just going to use this to rest my transmission on while I get some other stuff sorted out. Should hold it okay. Yeah. So it looks like I'm going to trim my right front motor mount a little bit more for clearance around my fuel pump bracket. And because this engine is pushed back as far as I can get it, I need to clearance it just a little bit more. But because I'm pushing the engine as far back as it'll go, I'm not going to be able to use a mechanical fuel pump. So I will probably run a in-tank fuel pump that's a low pressure with a regulator and a return. It is what it is. I don't mind doing that. It'll be quiet, and if the car sits for a long time, key up, it'll start easy. It'll be good for drivability. Is if the car sits for a couple months over the winter, you go key it up, the pump will prime the system, car will fire right up real quick without burning up the battery. So this is a service replacement transmission assembly, also known as a CERTA from GM. It's a low miles unit I picked up at a very reasonable cost. Helped keep the budget down low. This is a 4L60E, which means I will have to get a standalone controller to run this transmission, but it will give us overdrive and a lockup converter, which for freeway driving will really make this a fun vehicle. So I'll get into more of that here soon, but today is done. I managed to not burn down my shop after doing a bonehead move, and I'm still ending my day on a win because the engine and transmission are pretty much where I want them to be. A couple little adjustments. As I said, this motor mount, the engine actually needs to come back more because I'm not centered over here. So that'll pivot back. I just need to notch it a little bit. I need to get a fuel pump block off plate, and I need to remove the fuel rod from inside the engine, so when I have the mount off to modify it and clearance it, I will make that a reality. Then we will run our fuel lines, our brake lines to the back, everything under chassis, and then it's time to see if I can get the coil springs in this thing. That would be nice to actually have it sitting sprung. And it's time to put the body back down on this thing. Moving pretty good. Got a lot done. I'm pretty happy. Well, again, we appreciate you watching our shows. We're just a small shop in Central Ohio. We like to do cool stuff, and we like to share that stuff with you guys. We appreciate you subscribing to our channel. As always, click like, leave us a comment. We'd be happy to get back with you. In the meantime, it's Saturday. Have a great day, guys. We'll see you around.